Virtually all games follow a certain pattern. Between the different genres of games, this pattern will differ. So Call of Duty or Battlefield's pattern is quite different from an Elder Scrolls game, which is likewise different from an isometric RPG such as Pillars of Eternity, which itself is different from a game such as Civilization. But across the many different genres of games, there's one thing that remains fairly constant, and that is either leveling up, progressing, or their equivalents. It's a sort of moving from A to B. In fact, for many people, myself included, this is a primary motivator for playing a game. There can be an amazing story, detailed characters, a beautiful setting, but all that is for naught if leveling and character development are not on par with the other aspects of the game. And virtually all games, especially RPGs, provide that experience of leveling and improving your character. Almost invariably, it follows a scheme of starting at level 1 and leveling up to whatever the level cap of the respective game might be. So far, so good. But the leveling journey is not always simple. Abilities and spells need to be balanced between the levels, as too rapid leveling can ruin the experience. And encounters need to be balanced around the leveling so that they are neither too easy nor too difficult. And as a rule, this is how it plays out in most games. But sometimes new elements are added to games on top of basic class leveling. For some games, leveling up and gradually becoming more powerful was not enough, or at least developers thought it would not be enough. So they decided to add more and more of these elements, and these are typically story-integrated features that offer new powers and abilities beyond normal class leveling to the player. Possibly the first instance of this, in modern gaming at least, was the Baldur's Gate series in the 1990s, where the Baalspawn, the divine child of the dead god Baal, is given divine powers. But these powers are nothing amazing, the equivalents of some extra minor spells, maybe. Still, they do give you a sense of being a little more than just a guy leveling through a game, and they are most importantly tied to the story. But before I proceed, I should at least get something out of the way lest I be accused of not sufficiently acknowledging it. In some sense, every protagonist of every RPG is a kind of hero, and his journey is a kind of hero's journey. And that alone makes said protagonist special, more than just the average character in the setting. In some sense, the hero of a game, even if all he is just a quote-unquote warrior, rogue, or mage with nothing else to him, is somewhat chosen and elevated above the rabble of the world. And you're meant to feel this when you play him. That said, the phenomenon I seek to address in this video goes well beyond that, because I'm actually talking about something else. As the original Baldur's Gate series set a precedent, several games followed suit in terms of the stories and gameplay they offered. Pillars of Eternity, sometimes referred to as a spiritual successor of Baldur's Gate, for example, puts you in the position of being a watcher, a being, albeit mortal, that can see souls, speaks to the dead, and can wield unusual powers on top of the racial and class abilities you might gain during the course of your adventures. And that's not too surprising given that it was a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate. Most recently, we've seen the addition of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, also an isometric RPG, that offers the player so-called mythic paths that grant the player semi-divine powers and set them on the path of near godhood, with such paths actually being integrated into the story quite deeply, leading to dramatically different results for the player, with all this being on top of your normal class and racial abilities. But what about the Elder Scrolls? Traditionally, as we probably all know, every Elder Scrolls game begins with the player being trapped as a prisoner, whereupon said player is set free under narratively driven circumstances. Morrowind did this, Oblivion did this, and of course, Skyrim did this. And this is simply the tradition of Elder Scrolls games as we know it. The player subsequently is put into the world and can do more or less what he wants in the world as he levels up his character in a traditional way by actively using his skills, improving them. And Skyrim, having added Fallout's perk system, allows for this with even greater depth, with a much more tailored experience than earlier Elder Scrolls titles. But Skyrim also does something else that no other title in the Elder Scrolls series has ever done before. Yes, you are a prisoner. And yes, you are set free. Set free into a world embroiled in a civil war, as two factions, the Empire and the Stormcloaks, duke it out for dominance. And though it takes you some time to discover, it is hinted at in the beginning, because you are set free in the chaos of a massive dragon attacking the people who are about to execute you, alluding to your later destiny. Not too far into the game, you discover that it wasn't all mere coincidence, but in fact was part of your destiny, as upon slaying a dragon, a creature not seen for millennia, you discover that you are not simply just another mortal, but a Dovahkiin, or Dragonborn, a mortal with the ability to slay dragons and absorb their souls, and as a consequence, innately endowed with the ability to use the Way of the Voice, an ancient form of dragon magic that allows you to shout, projecting your voice and creating powerful effects in the process. As anyone watching this knows, you learn shouts by exploring the world and discovering new locations, and their effects can be quite powerful at times. But beyond that, your destiny as Dragonborn is built into the very story itself, as you must defeat Alduin the World Eater, first of the dragons, and threat to Skyrim and Tamriel. Your status as Dragonborn is arguably far more important than your class and levels, because apart from some comments from guards and cities about your magic, thieving, or fighting skills, your Dovahkiin status is directly woven into the story itself, and even recurs later in such DLC as Dragonborn. With this, Bethesda has set a new precedent, both in terms of player expectations and narrative device. More so than any other Elder Scrolls game, Skyrim sets the bar very high, because you're not just a hero, not just special, you've been appointed by the gods themselves to stop the World Eater and his kin. And this also creates a horizon of expectations that Bethesda will likely have to fulfill. On the one hand, one could call it a matter of power creep, and that could be an issue. But far more than that, it could be seen as an issue of obligation, as Bethesda, whether rightly or wrongly, will see themselves as having to one-up themselves in developing the next Elder Scrolls title in light of Skyrim. Not in light of sales and success, but in light of its story, and the magic and gameplay that is inextricably linked to it, i.e. shouts. Any Elder Scrolls title going forward would, at least theoretically, have to exceed the package that was delivered in Skyrim, within the context of the terms I've explained. The next prisoner to be released will likely not just be a prisoner who stumbled across his fate, but something far more, someone far greater. Normal levels and perks will be seen as insufficient, although they certainly will be part of it, but there will also be much more than a mere mortal trying to solve a mystery or defeat a grand enemy. The stakes will simply have to be far higher than before. Essentially, I'm suggesting that the player will be moving ever closer to divinity, because any alternative will necessarily fail to meet expectations. Of course, it is possible for Bethesda, and really anyone, not to rehash and redo the Chosen One meme or project, or turn your mortal protagonist into something divine. But the requirement for that would likely have to involve a total rehashing of all the basic systems, which would include graphical systems, UI, leveling and perk systems, more fluid combat, and many other features. Then the question remains, when you're constantly setting the bar higher and higher, whether you call it power creep or not, will the average player accept a reset to something more pedestrian? Developers need to walk a fine line between setting the bar of gameplay and expectations ever higher and what is reasonable. Becoming a god, of course, sounds cool and feels potentially amazing, but then you're forced to deal with the fallout later of where you go after you've become a god. At some point in time, there would need to be a reset of sorts, though I personally don't foresee this happening for Elder Scrolls 6. So the real question is just how godly and divine we might become in the forthcoming Elder Scrolls game, or really any other game that sets the precedent in the future. Time will tell. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe, comment, share, and I will check you guys out later. Take care.